Before you is MSC Irena, the largest container ship ever built by humans. When you see this colossus preparing to take on cargo, the first thing that literally hits your perception is its scale. It is not just big, it is overwhelmingly huge. From bow to stern, the vessel stretches for 1,312 feet. That is almost a quarter of a mile in length. If you were standing at its base in a dry dock and lifted your head up, you would be facing a solid steel wall about as tall as a 15-story building. But size is only part of the story. The real amazement begins when you realize ships like this do things that seem impossible. And they do it with a crew whose head count is smaller than that of a professional American football team. The first thing that seems unbelievable is the volume of cargo. Container ships measure capacity in TEU, meaning 20-foot equivalent units. 1 TEU is a standard shipping container 20 feet long. MSC Irena can carry more than 24,000 TEU, 24,000 metal boxes, each filled with goods, stacked into rows that run the entire length of the ship and rise 24 containers above the deck. And then a fair question appears. How does something this top-heavy not capsize? The answer is engineering brought to perfection. If you look below the waterline, on both sides of the hull, you can see huge ballast tanks. These are special compartments that can be filled with seawater when needed, or drained. When the ship is fully loaded with containers towering above the deck, the ballast tanks are filled with water. This lowers the center of gravity and makes the ship stable. When the ship travels empty, the water is pumped out, so it does not sit too deep. In addition, the ship has a wide flat bottom and a massive keel that works like the weighted base of a boxing punching bag. Every time the vessel lists, that weight literally pulls it back toward the upright position. The engineers who designed ships like this calculated precisely how many containers can be stacked on top of each other before stability becomes a problem. The result is a ship that looks like it is about to tip over, but in reality stays stable even in waves 40 feet high. But before heading out to sea, the ship has to be loaded. And this process is a separate engineering miracle. When a container ship enters a port, time immediately starts working against it. Every hour at the berth is an hour when it is not carrying cargo across the ocean. And that means loading is refined to the precision of seconds. The main heroes of this process are ship-to-shore gantry cranes. These are giant steel structures rising more than 200 feet above the quay. They move on rails along the pier and are positioned precisely over the ship's cargo holds. A major port can deploy a whole dozen of these cranes, working at the same time on a single ship. But before a crane lifts a container, it has to be delivered to the ship's side. This is where straddle carriers come in. Tall, narrow machines that look like moving construction scaffolding on wheels. They drive directly over a container, lower a top-lift spreader, pick up the cargo between their legs, and carry it across the yard to the spot where the gantry crane is already waiting. In a busy terminal, there can be dozens of these machines. They work non-stop, like a conveyor belt, feeding containers to the cranes. Without them, the cranes would simply sit idle, waiting for cargo. And this is where work begins, that is far more complex than it looks from the outside. Loading containers is not an arcade claw game. Each crane lowers a device called a spreader. This is a metal frame that can expand or contract for containers that are 20 or 40 feet long. If you look closely at the corners of any container, you will see reinforced steel pieces with oval holes, corner castings. That is where the twist locks go. When the spreader is lowered onto a container, 4 twist locks enter the corner castings and rotate 90 degrees, locking the load. The whole operation takes about 2 seconds. After that, the container is lifted, carried over the ship, lowered into place, and the locks are released. An experienced crane operator can move 30 to 40 containers per hour. With several cranes working, a ship can be fully loaded in less than 24 hours. But speed is only half the task. The second, no less difficult part is figuring out where exactly each container must go. Even before the ship approaches the port, a detailed stowage plan has already been prepared for it. Every container has a strictly defined position. Visually, it looks like a giant game of Tetris, but here there are no accidents and no improvisation. Containers that must be unloaded at the first port of call are placed closer to the top. The heaviest ones are placed lower to keep the center of gravity as low as possible. Refrigerated containers, those that require cooling, are placed near power connections. Dangerous goods must be kept at a strictly defined distance from one another, and at the same time, the planner has to ensure the ship remains balanced not only side to side, but also from bow to stern. An error in the calculations can lead to a list, or worse, to dangerous stresses on the hull. So when you see cranes simply moving boxes around, in reality, behind every lift, there is invisible coordination. Planners, crane operators, port systems, and the ship's officers work as a single organism, turning chaos into order. After loading, a new problem appears: how to keep 24,000 metal boxes from being thrown overboard in the open ocean. A container ship at sea does not just move forward. It rolls from side to side, buries its bow into waves, slams into crests with such force that vibration runs through the entire hull. Any poorly secured container turns into a dangerous projectile. Containers do fall overboard. On average, about 1,500 containers a year are lost in the ocean. But if you consider that more than 250 million containers are transported by sea every year, that number is strikingly small. The cargo securing system works as follows. Containers located below deck are placed inside holds in special vertical guides, cell guides. They fit into the corner castings of the containers and hold them like pieces of a mosaic. Such containers practically do not need additional securing. The guides prevent sideways movement and hold the cargo even in heavy rolling. The situation on deck is much more complicated. There, the containers stand under the open sky, and they are held only by a combination of friction and fastening hardware. Between containers, twist locks are used, similar to those used by cranes, but intended for permanent securing. They connect the upper and lower container through the corner castings. The bottom container in each stack is attached to deck locks that connect it directly to the ship's structure. But for the upper levels, that is not enough. This is where lashing rods come in, long steel bars that run diagonally from the upper containers down to securing points on the deck. On these rods, there are turnbuckles that allow the crew to tighten them into a state of constant tension. As a result, the entire stack is as if pulled inward, resisting the forces that try to push the containers outward during rolling. Looking at such a tower, a logical question arises. How do the lower containers withstand the colossal weight? A 10-high stack can press on the bottom container with a force of more than 250 tons. But containers are designed for exactly such loads. Most of the strength is concentrated in the corner castings and vertical posts. The weight is transmitted strictly downward through the frame. The walls carry almost no load. Every standard container is certified for a load of no less than 192 tons, and most models significantly exceed that figure. Despite automation, this critically important stage remains manual. The workers who install and check all the securing equipment are called stevedores. They do this work by hand, in any weather, day and night. For one ship, thousands of individual securing points may be required, each one of which must be installed and checked before departure. This is one of the hardest and least visible professions in global logistics. When the containers are loaded and securely fixed, control fully transfers to the bridge. This is where all decisions about course, speed, and navigation are made, and it is located, at first glance, in the strangest place. On most container ships, the bridge is located at the stern, in the very back of the vessel. Ahead of it are hundreds of feet of containers, stacked in dozens of rows, and rising to a height of up to 24 containers. From the bridge windows, the crew is essentially looking at a wall of metal that completely blocks a direct view forward. But on the largest container ships in the world, this arrangement is radically changed. On the biggest ships, the bridge is shifted far forward and sits only 6 rows of containers from the bow. This is not a design flourish and not an engineer's whim. This placement frees the central part of the hull for uninterrupted container stacks, increases TEU capacity, and at the same time allows formal compliance with visibility requirements over the bow, even with the deck fully loaded. But if you look at the ship from the side, it becomes obvious. Even with this shift, the crew still cannot see what is directly in front of the bow. So how do they steer a ship without seeing where they are going? The answer is on the bridge consoles. In front of the crew is a whole set of screens and systems. Radar shows all vessels within a radius of 20 nautical miles. GPS provides positioning accuracy to within a few feet. An electronic chart system shows a digital map of the ocean with the ship's current position, depths, coastline, and navigational hazards. This system is called ECDIS, Electronic Chart Display and Information System. But the key solution to the blind spot problem is a forward video surveillance system. Modern container ships are equipped with cameras installed on the bow and on the forward mast. Live video is transmitted to the bridge monitors. Some ships use thermal cameras for night operations. Others are fitted with LiDARs capable of detecting objects that may not appear in camera view. There is also a simpler approach. The bridge itself is built on a high superstructure that raises it above the deck and gives officers a better viewing angle over the container stacks. But even then, forward visibility remains limited, so the crew trusts instruments more than eyes. The bridge operates around the clock. The crew stands watch in shifts. Usually a watch includes an officer responsible for navigation and collision avoidance, as well as a helmsman who monitors the autopilot and, if necessary, takes manual control. The captain does not stand watch continuously, but is called to the bridge in any non-standard situation. And yes, in most cases, these ships steer themselves. Modern autopilot systems can hold a course, compensate for wind and current, and follow pre-programmed routes across the entire ocean. But a human is always watching. The ocean is unpredictable. Traffic conditions change. Weather can deteriorate sharply. The autopilot takes over the routine. All non-standard decisions remain with the crew. Communication is provided by several redundant systems. VHF radio connects the ship with other vessels and shore services. Satellite systems provide voice communication and data transmission anywhere on the planet. When approaching a port, the bridge coordinates actions with pilots, tug captains, and vessel traffic services. The most unexpected thing is the size of the crew. On a ship of this size, there are usually only a few dozen people, and that is all. For a structure that in size surpasses the Empire State Building, these people remain completely alone in the middle of the ocean. The ship becomes their home. The crew's living quarters are usually located in the superstructure, in that very tower where the bridge is. Inside, there is nothing extra, but everything necessary. Officers have separate cabins. Junior crew have shared rooms. There is a mess hall where the crew gathers for meals, a small gym, a lounge with a television, sometimes a tiny library or a game area. This is not luxury and not a cruise. Ocean views impress you only for the first few days. After several weeks, the monotony begins to press down. These people are not passengers. They are working seafarers. Their job is to keep the ship moving, and that work does not stop day or night. An MSC Irena crossing of the Pacific can take about 2 weeks without a single stop. During that time, the crew's life follows a strict rhythm. Watches run around the clock. A typical pattern is 4 hours on duty, 8 hours of rest, and then again and again, with no weekends and no holidays. During watch, officers control the bridge. Engineers monitor the engine room, and that is far more complex than simply glancing at instruments and mopping floors. The power plant of such a vessel is one of the largest engines ever created by humans. We are talking about a two-stroke diesel engine that rises to the height of 4 stories, stretches more than 80 feet in length, and produces more than 80,000 horsepower. At cruising speed, it burns from 150 to 300 tons of fuel per day. The crankshaft alone weighs more than 300 tons. If you go down into the engine room, you find yourself in a labyrinth of walkways, pipelines, and control stations spread across multiple decks. The noise here is deafening. The temperature is exhausting. Engineers make rounds in protective ear defenders and sweat-soaked coveralls. They check readings, listen for vibrations, and look for any deviation from normal. Computer systems automatically detect most faults. But no automation can replace a person who personally walks every section. A small leak noticed in time is routine maintenance. That same leak, ignored 3,000 miles from the nearest port, can turn into a catastrophe. While engineers keep the power plant running, the deck crew handles everything else. And there is always plenty of work. Steel ships rust. That is inevitable. Salt, moisture, and time destroy any exposed surface. So a significant part of every voyage goes to fighting corrosion. The crew chips off old paint, treats rust spots, and applies new protective coatings. Sometimes you can see sailors hanging over the side in special bosun's chairs, painting sections of the hull that can only be reached at sea. In the industry, they even joke, a ship's voyage is just the interval between painting jobs. Routine is broken only by weather. When a storm front crosses the ship's course, everything changes. Work on deck stops. Everything unsecured is tied down. The bridge continuously tracks the situation, adjusting course and speed to reduce stress. In heavy conditions, containers can shift, lashings can fail, and the hull itself can experience extreme loads. The crew's job is to prevent that, but most days pass without drama. Work, food, sleep, work again. The ocean stretches to the horizon, uniform, calm, endless. And one morning, land appears on the radar screens. And then the most difficult part of the voyage begins. There is one thing almost nobody thinks about. A fully loaded container ship weighs more than 200,000 tons. At cruising speed, it moves at about 25 miles per hour, and it has no brakes. To stop a ship of that size using only its own engines requires from 1 to 2 nautical miles. Reverse thrust only gradually bleeds off speed, but inertia here is ruthless. Physics does not care how expensive the cargo is on board. That is exactly why, when approaching a port, a container ship begins slowing down long before entering the harbor. Even after that, it still carries far too much energy to berth safely on its own. At this moment, tugboats take the stage. As soon as the ship enters the port, a group of 4 to 6 tugboats forms around it. Some go to the bow, others take positions along the sides or at the stern. These vessels are tiny compared to the container ship, but their power is astonishing. Each tug can produce from 5,000 to 8,000 horsepower. Their task is to pull, push, and literally break the container giant's inertia during the final stage of maneuvering. If you look at the numbers, you realize how serious this is. One tugboat, pressing against the side of a container ship, can create a lateral force of more than 80 tons. Multiply that by 6 tugboats working in sync, and you get enough force to move 200,000 tons of steel sideways, centimeter by centimeter, precisely toward the berth. During this stage, communication does not break for a single moment. A pilot, who boarded earlier from a small vessel, coordinates actions between the bridge and the tug captains. Commands sound clear and without ambiguity. Tug on the starboard side, push at 50%, bow tug, pull left, stern tug, hold position. One mistake, one misunderstood order, and the ship can strike the pier or drift toward another vessel. When the distance to the berth shrinks to a minimum, the deck crew gets involved. They prepare the mooring lines, massive ropes and cables that will hold the ship in place. The first lines are sent from the bow and stern. They are dropped down, where port workers put them over bollards. The ship's winches take up the slack, slowly pulling the hull toward the berth's protective fenders. Then, additional lines follow. Spring lines, to keep the ship from moving forward or backward. Breast lines, to press the hull against the pier. A fully moored container ship can be held by 12 to 16 lines, each of them under tension measured in thousands of pounds. When all lines are tight and the gangway is lowered, the tugboats let the ship go and move away. The ship is secured, and almost immediately, the gantry cranes take their positions. Twist locks engage, containers begin rising from the deck, and somewhere far beyond the horizon, another ship like it is already sailing, repeating this endless cycle of global logistics. See you soon.